All right, let's get right into it. The Pope versus the Emperor. This was basically a medieval showdown, a real heavyweight championship match for who would ultimately control Europe.
So who do you think gets the final say? Is it the king, the guy with the army, or is it the Pope, the one who supposedly has God on his side? I mean, this was the question back then, and it led to this huge, messy, but really important fight that, believe it or not, still affects how we think about power today. Okay, so to understand this, you got to picture the medieval world having two CEOs. You had the Pope, who was the spiritual boss, the head of the church, and then you had the Emperor, who was the political boss, the top ruler of the land. Now, here's the problem. Everybody believed God hired them both, but nobody gave them a clear job description. It was like, where does the Pope's power stop and the Emperor's begin? That confusion right there is where things start to get really messy.
So this huge conflict didn't just explode out of nowhere over some vague idea. No, it all came down to one very specific question. Who gets to pick the team?
And that brings us to this term, lay investiture. It sounds complicated, but it's not. A lay person is just anyone who isn't a priest or a bishop, a non-church official. So lay investiture was this super common practice where kings and lords, lay people, were the ones appointing powerful church officials like bishops. You can already see the problem, right? The king is picking the church's management. The Pope was not a fan. So here's how it would go down. The king would just choose a new bishop, maybe a friend, maybe a loyal supporter. Then the king himself would give the new guy the official symbols of his office, the ring and the staff. And this is the key part. That new bishop, his loyalty wasn't really to the Pope way over in Rome. Nope. He owed his job, his power, everything to the king. This whole situation was like a ticking time bomb, and it finally went off when two incredibly powerful and, let's be honest, incredibly stubborn men ended up in charge at the exact same time. Now this is where the showdown really begins. In one corner, we have Pope Gregory VII. He was a hardcore reformer, and he was absolutely convinced that the Pope was the supreme authority over everyone, and that includes kings. He believed he could hire and fire emperors if he wanted to. And in the other corner, you have Emperor Henry IV. He was just as convinced that his power came directly from God, and that gave him the right to appoint whoever he wanted in his own lands. Yeah, these two were on a collision course for sure. So Henry doesn't just, disagree quietly. He goes all in. He sends this letter to the Pope that basically says, you're a fake monk and you need to step down. This was like the medieval version of a nuclear tweet. He was calling out the Pope in public for everyone to see. And you think Pope Gregory is just going to take that? No way. He pulls out his ultimate weapon. He hits Henry with excommunication. So what is excommunication? Well, it means you're kicked out of the church. For a normal person, that was a huge deal, spiritually. But for a king, it was a political disaster. See, the Pope also declared that all of Henry's subjects and nobles didn't have to be loyal to him anymore. All of a sudden, any rival who wanted the crown now had the perfect, God-approved excuse to start a rebellion. And just like that, Henry's power starts to unravel. His nobles start turning on him. He's losing control. He is absolutely desperate. And what he does next? Well, it goes down in history as one of the most dramatic moments of the entire Middle Ages. To save his crown, Henry realized he had to go beg the Pope for forgiveness. And he doesn't just send a letter. No, he travels himself across the snowy Alps in the dead of winter. Just try to picture that. The most powerful ruler in Europe trekking through the freezing cold, all to save his skin. So Henry finally arrives at the castle of Canossa, where the Pope is staying. But Pope Gregory doesn't just open the door. He makes him wait. For one day, Henry stands outside, barefoot in the snow. Then a second day. He's still out there, freezing. It's not until the third day that Pope Gregory finally agrees to see him and at last lifts the excommunication. Talk about a power move. So, okay, Henry got what he came for. His throne was safe, for the moment. But who really won that confrontation? It was the Pope. That image, the mighty emperor, barefoot and begging in the snow, sent a message that echoed across all of Europe. It proved that the Pope's power was real, and it could humble even the most powerful person on the continent. Now, you'd think that would be the end of the story, right? Emperor is humbled, Pope wins, credits roll. But nope. The conflict actually kept going for years after that. It took a long, long time for them to finally sit down and hammer out a real compromise. And that compromise has a fantastic name, the Concordat of Worms. And it was actually pretty smart.
Here's the deal they made. The church gets to choose its own bishops and give them their spiritual symbols, the ring and staff. But the emperor gets to be there during the election, and he's the one who grants the bishop his land and his worldly powers. Basically, they split the job in half. The church handles the spiritual side, the emperor handles the political side.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Why does this medieval drama still matter? Well, for one, the Pope's power grew enormously after this. But even bigger than that, this whole fight was really the first major step towards the idea of separating church and state. You know, the idea that maybe religious power and political power shouldn't be held by the same people. It forced rulers to learn that they had to negotiate and share power, and it kicked off a huge conversation about law and what gives a person the right to rule in the first place.
Which really makes you think, doesn't it? How does a power struggle that happened over 900 years ago still echo in the way we think about leadership, about law, and about the line between politics and religion today? It's a conflict that raised questions we're still trying to answer.